Hello everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Gaming in the Wild, a video games podcast about games from the artistic, creative side of the tracks, from indie to AAA. My name's John, I'm your host. I'm speaking to you from Reykjavik, Iceland, where right now there is a huge windstorm happening right outside my house. The house is kind of shaking actually, and I can see that when there's no sound, it's being picked up on the mic, even though I've got the mic down really low. So if you can hear the windstorm in the background during quiet moments, I hope it's not too distracting. Today I'm going to talk about a true AAA game. It's one of the most successful video games of all time, and it's the Western Outback epic Red Dead Redemption 2. To the surprise of absolutely no one who follows me on Twitter. It's all that I've been tweeting about for the last week or so. I spoke about it briefly last episode when I had a few kind of early thoughts, but now I'm 25 hours in. I've moved camp a couple of times, I've ridden around and engaged in the game to a pretty large degree. Been playing it pretty much every day. I'm obsessed at this point. So it's really gotten its hooks into me, and I'm really excited to talk about it more. Later in the show, I'll also talk about a couple of other games that I've tried out or finished. I've completed Falcon Age. I'm almost done with I Am Dead. And I had a little go on Fallout 76 as well, because the game's on sale. And I've seen that there's a huge community around that game, even though it's so divisive critically. It has a really big active community, and so I've just been quite curious to try it out. So I downloaded the trial, and I didn't go through and buy the game, so that might give you some idea of my thoughts on it, but I'll talk about that one a little at the end as well. But before all that, let's dive into the episode's featured game, Red Dead Redemption 2. So this game came out in 2018. It's a prequel to Red Dead Redemption, made by Rockstar Games. It was 8 years in development, which is quite extraordinary, but given the results that they got, worth it. It's the fifth best game ever according to Metacritic, and was a critical smash at the time. It's in the teens of the best-selling games of all time, at 32 million copies, which is more than Call of Duty, Skyrim, and Sonic the Hedgehog. It cost $80 million US to make, but despite that kind of extravagant price tag, it made $725 million on its launch weekend alone. So this is a really big game that we're talking about this time. This is one of the kind of landmark blockbuster games of the generation. One of the most critically acclaimed games of the generation, and it's quite a wonderful game. I have tried to play this one twice now. The first time I played it, I did the first segment of the game, where you start out on the mountains and come down to your camp, and then I became a little blinded by the options. This is a game which has a certain sprawl to the landscape, and kind of a free-form play style where you can kind of choose what kind of game you want it to be, whether you want to be like a gunslinger and an outlaw and a bandit, or whether you just want to ride around doing tourism and staying out of trouble, or whether you want to go robbing trains, or whether you want to go picking herbs and fishing and stuff like that. This game really is what you make it. It's kind of a remarkable achievement, but it does give you a lot of freedom at the start once the game opens out after that initial first area. And so I kind of found myself a little at a loss the first time that I tried to play it. I wasn't exactly sure what I should be doing, and the instinct to come back and pick it up again wasn't quite there. But this time, I really got stuck into it and have ploughed a lot of hours into the game now, and I'm really enjoying myself, and I feel like I have a much greater understanding of what it's all about. And so even though I haven't finished it, I'm 25 hours in, as I said. I think that's about, I think I have 35% completion at this moment. So there's a lot of the game to go. But most of the mechanics I've now had a chance to get familiar with. And I've explored a large sort of a third of the map. And so it feels like a good time to talk about it. Also, I mean, in this podcast, I talk about whatever I've been playing. And this game has just swamped my time for the last week. And so I kind of didn't have an option but to talk about it, as it's all I've been playing. So it's going to be pretty much a spoiler-free podcast, pretty much necessarily, because I don't have many spoilers to give you. I'm aware that the narrative goes in directions that have made the game a kind of a beloved Western and a landmark narrative game. But as yet, most of that stuff has not unfolded for me. So you're in safe territory when it comes to spoilers. But if you haven't played this game, let's start at the start. You play Arthur Morgan. You're an outlaw, and you are the right-hand man of a Dutch van der Linde, who is the head of the Van der Linde gang. This is a kind of a ragtag group of outlaws that have been together for a long time. They're almost like a family. Dutch is the kind of father figure. He's kind of charismatic, a little bit wild, a little bit loose. And Arthur is his kind of rock steady, steadfast right-hand guy who he trusts to kind of run the finances of the camp and to kind of get shit done, whatever that might be. And the game begins in some snowy mountains in a deep storm. And the gang has just escaped from a heist gone wrong in a town called Blackwater, and they are on the run. And to try and get away from the law, they've been forced into the mountains. And it's a really cool intro. You start in a deep snowstorm. The snow is swirling in the air. There's deep snow, and the horses are running through it. And I was really, really struck by the visuals of this game right from the start. The weather system is amazing. The light is amazing. The realism of the horses, which is never an easy thing to do, and very few games get it right. The horses are like incredibly naturalistic. The voice acting was great right from the start. It was just a cinematic experience. It made my PlayStation sound like it was going to take off, but they've definitely used all the power of the system in this game. And so you come through the storm and you find some cabins, and the gang holes up there to wait out the storm. And in this period, you get some cutscenes, you get to walk around and talk to different members of the gang, and you start to get a feeling of what Arthur thinks about them all. There is some kind of internal politics in this gang, you know. There's like a kind of a slightly wild gunslinger guy. There is a veteran outlaw called Jose, who Arthur seems to look up to as kind of a father figure in some ways. He's quite moral, you know. He doesn't kind of go wild. He just likes to make money and get on by. There's a couple of younger members of the gang. Dutch has an Irish girlfriend called Molly, who's a very strong character. And there's Mrs. Grimshaw is like the matriarch of the camp. She's like the kind of older maternal figure. And all of them are almost miraculous creations. It really feels like an ensemble cast. They're very naturalistic. They all have their own kind of walks and their own personality quirks and their own, you know, dress sense, and they have their own opinions about things. All of the voice acting is wonderful. It really does feel like you're on a cinematic journey right from the off of this game. And you get a couple of tutorials when the storm breaks. You're taken out to hunt for some food and taught how to use your bow and arrow to creep up on deer, to shoot down deer, stow them on your horse and take them back to the camp. You're taught how to skin animals and take some meat and hides from them. And then just when the things seem to be getting back on track and the weather's breaking and the gang is getting themselves back together, there is a sighting of someone from the O'Driscolls, who are a rival gang. And Dutch being Dutch, he's like a little raggedy, a little wild. He's not at all conservative. Arthur seems to have a slightly conservative... He kind of just wants to slope off into the west and escape from all of this attention. But Dutch being Dutch, he wants to investigate and to take out the O'Driscolls. And so you're taken off on your first raid. You ride through the snow with your henchmen, and you creep up on the O'Driscoll's camp, and you are introduced to the shootout mechanics of the game. And those are that you take cover, you can use stealth to approach, you can use your binoculars to scope out camps, and then once you engage, you can use a dead-eye mechanism, which is that you hit the R3, you hit the right stick, time slows right down, and you can mark different points on an opponent, and then when you release the bullets, they all kind of fire out in bullet time, and you get these kind of spectacular shots that Arthur can do. You're also introduced to a couple of the other core mechanics, like Arthur has 3 main energy gauges. He has his health, he has his stamina, and he has the dead eye. And each of those has a core, which you have to refuel by resting and eating. And then, as well as a core, it has a kind of a gauge that runs down, which can be topped up over time or topped up using tonics and things like that. They have bitters and they have health tonics and all of those things that were used back then in the day. So after your first hunting trip and your first shootout, the weather breaks, the Vanderlyn gang comes down from the mountains, you do a train robbery. This is all within the first 5 hours of the game. Dutch gets a tip about a train. You hit a train, which means you have to ride up alongside it, you have to jump on, massive shootout, and you're taught that you have to wear a mask when you do crimes so that you can't be identified. You're taught how to kind of search cabinets and find valuables. And then the gang comes down into the grasslands and the forests that lie beneath the mountains, and they set up camp. And it's at that point that you've finished the kind of the training wheels part of the game, and you are given your first taste of the vast freedom of Red Dead Redemption 2. So after the mountains, the gang sets up camp near the town of Valentine. It's a tiny western village, really. And this is where you have your first experience of just kind of waking up in the morning and looking around. And something that struck me at this moment was that something that games generally struggle to achieve is a feeling of kind of organic life unfolding around you. I mean, even in games that do it very well, like Horizon Zero Dawn springs to mind. It's very, very clear in Horizon Zero Dawn that there are sections where you're running around in the world and you get maybe an occasional interaction, and then you get somewhere and it's time to talk to a character, and then you flip into story mode. And it's not particularly well integrated. Aloy is always on the run. She's always running around doing stuff. And then there are these little settlements that are kind of camp points or whatever. But in Red Dead Redemption 2, when you wake up in the morning, for the first time I looked around and I saw people kind of crawling out of their tents in bedclothes, kind of going off to get some coffee, going out into the forest to do whatever people do in the forest in the morning if you're an outlaw. People are kind of stretching and grouchy and kind of scratching their heads and sort of sitting at the table with a bit of breakfast or whatever. And I just walked around looking at what was unfolding around me, and it really felt like being in a theatre play or something. It was quite amazing, the way that the characters walk and move. This cast is really something. And there are a few different tents that you can go to in the camp that have different functions. There's a kind of a meat and hides sort of butcher supplies guy. He's kind of a big, chubby, red-faced chef wearing a stovepipe hat. Then there is Mrs. Grimshaw, who has the medical tent where you can pick up a few tonics and things like that. There is also a gang tithing box where you have to throw in a little bit of whatever you made in your last raid, whether it's objects like belt buckles and pocket watches, or whether it's cash. And there are also some places that you can go to pick up tasks. So, for example, there is a guy called Leopold Strauss, the German loan shark. And if you go and talk to him, he'll give you a couple of collection jobs. So you have to go out and recover debts from people, which sounds easy enough, but more often than not, the deck collection turns into quite a colourful story mission when you actually find the poor soul that you're trying to extract money from. And what you do from here is pretty much up to you. If you open up the map, there are a couple of dots on it, perhaps somewhere that you've been told to investigate, or initials of where someone else in the gang is waiting for your help. But you can just do what you like, really. You can go riding around. I think the first thing that I did was just get on my horse and go for a ride. Rode down a hill to a gushing river, and there were some deer around there, and there was like a burned out village. And so I spent a bit of time trying to stalk deer and making a right mess out of it. This game has a lot of simulation mechanics, so if you're a total noob like I was, then you're probably just going to blast a deer with your pistol and then find out that you ruined the hide and it's not going to be worth very much. Whereas if you'd used a bow and arrow and hit the deer with a headshot, then the hide would be intact. And so I had a little run around, looked at this ruined village. Arthur kind of made some notes in his journal. You can check out the journal at the end of a passage of play, and you'll find that Arthur tends to jot down his thoughts and make little sketches and stuff. You actually learn a little bit about what Arthur thinks about the situation when you look in his journal. You're reading his diary, really. He's a very distinctive character, is Arthur. He's kind of gruff, and he's kind of been raised an outlaw, and he has a kind of a ruthless streak, but he's well-meaning in some ways. He expresses doubts about the lifestyle of being an outlaw and the kind of the moral reality of being an outlaw. But at the same time, when he gets into trouble, gets into a scrape, he has absolutely no qualms in mowing people down. So this kind of morality of Arthur is one of the themes of the game. In fact, if you help someone out, like a passerby, or if you're fishing and you throw back a fish, then you'll get a little white hat plus symbol flash up on the screen, which means that you've inched towards being a white hat good guy. And if you kind of rob or kill just randoms, or if you do bad stuff, then you get a little black hat and your rating goes down. And this moral scale of the choices that you make as Arthur has a bearing on how you're treated and things that Arthur says and does. So after that first initial ride around, I also got into a bit of trouble. There was some gunshots over in the distance, and I went to investigate, and it turned out that a traveller was in the middle of a heist, basically. He was being hit by a couple of gangsters, and so I kind of shot down the gangsters, and he ran off on his horse and thanked me. And so that was my first incidental encounter. And then went back to the camp, and it was nightfall, and I put a little bit of cash in the box and went to sleep and thought, okay, well, not exactly sure what that was, but it was fun. And what you find when you get back to the camp is just as interesting as that kind of waking up sequence that I talked about. You never quite know what's going to be going on. So some of my favourite things that have happened when I came back was one time I came back at sunset after like a day of outlawing, and Dutch was outside of his tent and he'd put on the gramophone. Dutch, as the gang leader, has the biggest tent with a gramophone inside, and he was playing some music, and him and Miss Grimshaw were dancing. They were just doing this kind of beautiful, slow dance in the middle of the camp to the gramophone. And I just stood watching them as the sun was going down, and it was just a beautiful gaming moment. And, you know, it's not like a big moment, it's a small moment, but there are so many small moments in Red Dead Redemption 2 that really make it feel authentic. Like another time I came back and there was a dog in the camp, and John, who is the protagonist of Red Dead Redemption, is in this game. He's a member of the gang too. I have not played the first game, so I don't really know him, but he has a kid as well. So this kid was playing with the dog that had come into the camp, and he was going, "Look, Arthur, a dog!" And the dog was barking and running around, and the kid was chasing it. And I was just thinking, wow, this is so lifelike. You really do get a feeling of being in a kind of a family situation. It's really remarkable, that part of the game. And another part of the game that is noteworthy is the landscape. I've never seen a rendering of nature quite like this one. It's one of the best that I've seen in an open world game. The way that everything feels handcrafted, Everything feels very real, like the way that the roads turn into trails when the road gets more busy. You'll see that wagons have been down the road. On smaller tracks, you'll see that it's just like a sheep track. And where there are railroads, the road the horse road runs alongside of it and then crosses over at some point. And sometimes the trail goes through a river. There are mountains all around. And for example, the approach into Valentine, the nearby town, you'll get used to going that ride between the camp and Valentine. It's a ride that you're going to do a lot. I understand that there is fast travel later in the game, but I haven't unlocked it yet at 25 hours. And so you really just have to ride everywhere. And so a big part of this game is spent riding around in nature, looking at the trees, looking at the mountains, looking at the hills. You'll see lots of wildlife. Birds will take off in the distance. If there is a gunshot in the distance, then the wildlife will react. If you start to approach some pronghorn deer or some elk or different types of animals that there are in the game, they'll hear your horse approaching. They'll look up towards you as one. They'll snap their heads up, and then they'll run for it. And so as you're riding through nature, I know that some people find this part of the game a little boring, but honestly, I've not been bored riding around, even when it's like a 5-minute ride between two towns, because you just take a different route, just take in the landscape, take in the nature. You can see, the sun setting over the snowy mountains. You can see different kinds of trees. You can see parts of the landscape where the trees have been chopped down. In some places there are people building a cabin. In some places there are ranches. You have little incidental encounters like someone that's been thrown off their horse or something like that, and you can either help them or rob them. One interesting little incidental encounter I had was that I got off the horse, and it was some lady who said that she'd been bucked off her horse and she'd broken her leg. You get down to help her and increase your white hat ratio, and suddenly it turns out that it's a stick-up and some guys come running down from the rocks, and you have to take them all out with your Dead-Eye ability, and it turns out that you won't be getting any white hat points for how that goes down. But the landscape itself is really just wonderful. And as the game opens up even more, like at some point you will move camp. That's kind of when the different chapters of the game begin and end. Later on you'll go further down south where there's more of a kind of a swampy area with more marshland, different kinds of trees, different kinds of animals, more reptiles, and more red soil. The earth turns red. And I understand that later in the game there will be even more. But I went back to that mountain area, that initial area of the game. I didn't go back for a long time, but then as I'd kind of settled into the game and grown accustomed to the kind of freedom of the game, I just decided to go exploring and went back up into the mountains. And the kind of encounters that you have in the mountains are different, like the people that you'll find sitting by the campfire. One of my favourite encounters in the game so far was when I met a trapper. It was nighttime and I saw a fire and rode over to see what was going on. And it's a trapper. He's sitting there. He says, "I don't much like strangers, but you can join me if you want." And so I sat down by the fire and just cooked some meat from animals that I'd hunted. And he started telling stories. He was just talking about his life. And then suddenly he was like, "Hey, I think I know your face from somewhere." And so the conversation had turned from him being suspicious to being friendly and then turning back to being suspicious. And then he kind of got alarmed. He realized that he'd probably seen you on a wanted poster in Blackwater. And he was like, "Hey, I can't do anything without getting in trouble." And he kind of got on his horse and bolted for it. And I was like, wow, this was such a kind of interesting interaction. I'm in the mountains, so of course there are trappers here rather than, travelers going between cities. And of course my face has been around on posters, so it just felt very authentic in a way that only this game really has achieved out of the games that I've played. So it's really quite remarkable. Like the attention to detail, even small encounters feel really authentic. And one of the big qualms that I have with Ubisoft games is how the world reacts to you. Like, in Watch Dogs or in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, you'll be walking around doing similar things to Red Dead Redemption 2, like carrying out your tasks and so forth, exploring. But the mechanics feel a little wrong. Like in Assassin's Creed, if you walk past someone, sometimes they'll jump back as if you've done something alarming. But all you've done is really walk past them. Maybe you were a little bit too close, and it always seems a little extreme and unnatural. But in Red Dead Redemption 2, everything that happens feels right. Like if you approach that camp with your gun drawn, then you'll get an unwelcome reaction. If you're walking through town and you pull out a pistol, then people will say, "Hey, what are you doing?" and like get alarmed. And everything that you do feels super authentic. And so this game has really a world that you can sink into to a really large degree and have your immersion broken just never, which just seems so unique and special. And you're really seeing the work that went into the game. It's just tangible how hard people work to make this game what it is. And I'm still really just scraping the surface of all the things there are to do in the game. I mean, the incidental encounters are one thing, like you'll meet someone that's been bitten by a snake, and you have the options of robbing them or engaging with them, and if you sucked the snake venom out of this person's leg. There was one time I did that, and then it must have been like a play session later. I was riding through town and some guy summoned me over and was like, "Hey, mister," and I went over and it was that guy, and he was like, "I wanted to thank you so much for taking care of me, and you can get something on my tab at the store," and things like this. And then sometimes when you're out in the wilderness, you'll meet these kind of individuals that have different things going on. Like there is a trapper who will ask you to bring rare hides to him. So you can go out and hunt, and if you find like a really rare hide, you can take it to him and have special outfits made. There's a herbalist guy who is just kind of collecting different plants. And as you meet him, he teaches you about what the different plants do, different herbs and medicinal herbs and things like this. There is a wildlife photographer. The first time that I met him, it was hilarious because like a coyote stole his bag and ran off with it, and you had to go and recover it for him. And Arthur has a camera that you can use too. There's just so much going on. I think the latest one was that I met someone who was a part of a performing circus troupe, and he's lost some animals. So I have a few marks on my map that out there somewhere there is like a zebra for me to go and lasso. There is so much to do in this game. It's just crazy. I think that I haven't even engaged with some of the mechanics. Like on one of the trips, Jose was trying to teach me how to trap bears, to do bear baiting. So you have to gather some ingredients and make a lure, and then leave it somewhere and hide behind a rock and wait for a bear to come and then try and shoot down the bear. But in that instance, it doesn't go too well, but it's something that I've never gone back to. But I know that it's there in the game. Like if I wanted to, that is how I could spend one play session trying to trap a bear. There are also lots of different achievements that you can go for. Like Arthur has different attributes, like his gunplay. I just the other day saw that to complete the first sharpshooter achievement, I had to shoot down birds from the air. And so I was kind of, if I was riding along and I startled like a heron in the lake, it's a big target. So you kind of pull out a rifle and try and shoot down a heron to try and get that ability. There is just so much to do that it's crazy. I really feel like it would just take you forever to really get a handle on just how much there is to do in this game. I mean, if I'm 25 hours in and I'm still discovering mechanics and still discovering different activities, you can really make this game what you want it to be. It reminds me a little bit of No Man's Sky in that way, which is another game that has this kind of radical freedom to it, where you can be a base builder, or you can be like a fighter pilot, or you can be, an explorer. There are so many ways to play No Man's Sky, and Red Dead feels like that. There are many, many ways to play the game. I'm so far, I think, pretty much just kind of doing a tasting menu of all the different stuff. Like I'll go riding out and, unexpected things happen. Like if you find a wagon that has been held up, you can then, that's your day right there. It's like you shoot down the raiders, and presumably the guys who were running the wagon are already shot. And so you can take this wagon, but there's only one wagon fence in the whole game. And if he's far away from you, you're going to spend the day taking the wagon there, selling it for $40, and then get back on track and do what you were planning to do before. But something else will probably catch your eye too. And every corner of the game world has something for you, but it doesn't feel fake. Like when I found that burned out town, for example, I kind of searched a couple buildings. I thought there's nothing here and went on my way. Later on, I was circled back again, and I was like, hey, did I look in that one? And I looked in the sheriff's office and found like a locked box under a corner. Sometimes there are like loose planks in buildings, or you can search fireplaces and find valuables that have been stashed up there. There's just all kinds of little surprises, and it really rewards attention to detail as a player. It rewards you for being curious. There are also these cigarette cards that you find everywhere. I think once I found like just a kind of a ruined cabin in the woods and went inside, and there was some papers there, and there were 10 beds with corpses in them and loads of candles lit. And it turned out that they were like a cult that had done a suicide pact, and I found like a cigarette card there. And there were all these different types of cigarette cards that you can find too. There's a guy that collects them. So much to do. It's just almost overwhelming. And sometimes I have to be in a certain mood to play this game. Like, it's demanding of you as a player in a way, because you really have to fully engage with it to decide what you're going to do. It's absolutely not on rails. There is very kind of optional and vaguely minimal feeling kind of guidance. You really do have to kind of make it your own and learn how to be independent as a player. The only times when it does kind of break that realism is, for example, the O'Driscolls, like the opposing gang. They seem to be like a never-ending stream of guys. Like, I think at the first camp that we hit, we took out 10 of them, and then I must have taken out 5 more when I snuck up on the camp and sniped them off and had a gunfight there, and then 5 more when you're coming through town one time. And you know, if the Van der Linde gang has like 15 people in it or something, the O'Driscolls seem to be just this endless army. Like, honestly, if there's 200 O'Driscolls, this gang is an army. So that's slightly unrealistic. There are kind of couple moments where you feel the gamified nature of things that have been kind of shaped to your convenience just a little. But for the most part, that's absolutely not the case. Everything from like shaving Arthur's, you can choose how you want to wear his facial hair, whether you want to grow his hair or trim it. You can buy outfits for him. You can kind of, you can really shape this game into what you want it to be. I love it. I'll leave talking about this one there. I could talk about it all day, but we've done half an hour. I might well come back and talk about it again after I finished it and do a spoiler cast or something like that. Or if there's more to say, then we'll see. That's Red Dead Redemption 2. So I know that I said I was going to talk about Falcon Age and I Am Dead and Fallout 76, but I think I'll leave those games for another time, seeing as it's a half-hour podcast. Maybe I'll just talk about Fallout 76, actually, seeing as I only played it for an hour. But I downloaded this one out of curiosity to see what the community around the game is made of, and kind of just to get a feel for it. And I have to say I was a little disappointed by this one. The initial segment of it where you come out of the vault, you come out of a vault, you wake up, you come out of a vault where the best and brightest of humanity have been secreted away because of an oncoming nuclear apocalypse, and they're supposed to be released into the wild to repopulate or whatever. But when you come out, it's a kind of a Mad Max nightmare. There are kind of radiation-infected creatures everywhere to attack you, and there's a kind of a outlaw civilization. But I don't know, man. I felt like when I came out of the vault, I'm not like a huge graphics guy, but I have to say that this game felt really old. It was kind of blurry on the screen. It slowed down a lot, and it didn't even look that great to begin with, so I was like, okay, so if Last of Us 2 and Red Dead can run, how can this game that is from Bethesda, one of the biggest studios in the world, not make Fallout run when it looks, borderline PS3, PS4 generations? But I ran around for a little while just to try and get a feel for it. had a little bit of shootouts and picked up some collectibles and went to the first kind of mission point. There were other players online in the game area. I could see them on the map, and occasionally it would flash up that someone had kind of invited players to join their gang and carry out a raid or whatever. But I don't know, I just didn't feel gripped by it. The dialogue from the people that I encountered, the NPCs, was really stilted, and maybe it's because I've been playing Red Dead so much, but it really felt like a step backwards from what I'd been playing, a huge step backwards actually. So I just I deleted it. It's 80 gigabytes, and I thought, I'm not going to be buying this one even if it's £15. So I decided not to go for that one. I do have Fallout 4 on my PS4, which I'm told is much better, and I know that Fallout New Vegas is revered, so perhaps 76 wasn't the right place to start. But I think I will go and have a proper go at Fallout 4 at some point after I finished Red Dead 2. I did actually reach out on Twitter just before I started recording this episode and asked for any comments that people have about Red Dead. I got one from Danny C_VP, who says, "I believe one of the great things about Red Dead 2 is how, in a sea of formulaic open-world games, it has the courage to disregard the 40-second rule. It's not Death Stranding, but it's still brave enough to surrender gamers to the vastness of space and time, admirable for a AAA game." And I hadn't heard about the 40-second rule before Danny mentioned it, and I've looked into it, and it's pretty self-explanatory. It's that players have to be given something to do every 40 seconds. And as I had said, you can ride for 5 minutes in Red Dead without encountering anything. So he makes a good point. It does feel kind of perverse that as gamers we're asking for less to do in a game, but I really get Danny's point here. Sometimes games can feel so kind of packed with activities and encounters that it breaks your immersion. You really, really feel like you're playing a game and not that you're exploring a world. And so I really appreciate that Red Dead has that much space in it. It really lets you lean into the experience of being this kind of outdoorsman outlaw in the vastness of the United States. So I get Danny's point here, and I agree with it. I think that sometimes less is more, and it does take courage not to pack a game full of activities and to trust your audience to have the attention span to stick with it. So thanks to Danny for that question. If you'd like to get involved with the conversation, I'm on Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, Instagram, all as Gaming in the Wild. Twitter is my main place where I chat to people about games that I'm playing. I sometimes like to do polls and ask people for their favourite games. I had a poll recently about, or rather a question thread that was, if you could choose to have only one game wiped from your memory so that you could play it for the first time again, what would that game be? And that post went nuts, man. I had like 400 replies or something crazy on it. People saying all kinds of games, from really old like NES and SNES games right through up to, Ocarina of Time, Breath of the Wild. What was that one that was really popular again? It was the Mass Effect series was really popular. People really seem to want to be able to have that experience for the first time again. So if you'd like to get involved with those kind of conversations, find me on Twitter. I'm at Gaming in the Wild. Always happy to hear from people that are listening to the show, hear about if you guys have enjoyed Red Dead Redemption 2. If you have any comments, if you've been playing something else, then hit me up and let me know. Seeing as you've gotten this far in the podcast, I would also like to mention that I have a Patreon for the show. So at patreon.com/gaminginthewild, you can support the show for $3 a month, and you'll get exclusive podcasts for members only, and I'll do a weekly post about games that are on sale for the Switch and the PS4 that are recommended games, so you can save yourself some money and get some games that come recommended from this podcast. So please do consider that if you're a regular listener or if you enjoyed the show. I really appreciate it. Patrons also get access to the show's Discord server, where you can come and chat with other listeners and friends of the show and with me, and just talk about what we're playing, tell each other when we're going live on Twitch and things like that. It's a really nice little community, so you'll be invited to that too. So that's just $3 a month at patreon.com/gaminginthewild, and I really appreciate every single person who decides to support the show in that way. I currently have a grand total of 2 patrons, so Reagan Kelly and Angela Rawlings. You are both fantastic. So thanks very much for listening. I'll be back next week with a new podcast about a new game, assuming that I play something other than Red Dead 2, that is. But I have a bunch of Switch games lined up. I have Roki to review for Switch Indie Fix, and also my reviews of I Am Dead and Falcon Age are both filed with Adam from Switch Indie Fix, so they'll be going live this week too. So take care of yourselves and each other. Thanks for listening. Bye bye.